Yeah. All right. Good morning, Mr. Riggs. Good to see you today.
Good morning, Mr. Murdoch. How are you doing today?
Good. Thank you again for coming for this negotiation. I think I'm going to start at our previous offer of $65,000. And the only reason I'm starting at that offer is we have yet to hear a counter demand, but I'll kind of walk you through how we got to that offer. So your client's total medical expenses were $56,200, with lost wages $2,500, so that'd come to a total of $58,700. Now, so we typically do not pay 100% of the medical expenses in these cases. So 58,700, and then in addition with pain and suffering, we rounded that up to about 6,500. So I fully understand that you have no intention of accepting that offer today, but I would be very interested in hearing what your counter demand is.
So Miss Elliott is requesting the full policy amount of the 250,000. And I think we both know that if we were to go to trial, that she would be receiving that full 250,000 policy amount, if not even more. And so she is requesting that 250,000 today.
Ms. Riggs, I would have to respectfully disagree with you there. While the policy total is 250,000, these expenses definitely do not call for the $250,000. Now we have settled for about that much when there's been permanent nerve damage, facial disfiguration along those lines. Here, Miss Elliott just suffered two scars to her hand and her arm, from what I'm understanding. Her physical therapy looks like it's been progressing well. And so we don't think, obviously we would definitely don't want to see this go to trial either, which is why we're talking today. But if it has to, it has to. We can't give you the full policy.
So Miss Elliott actually could potentially suffer from permanent damage to her both arm tendons and hand tendons. And that has been told to her by a doctor. So there could be those future medical expenses for her as well if that does happen, as well as just different physical and psychological things that she has been going through. So while just the hospital bills and her medical expenses have been around 50,000, she's also had to do physical therapy for 6,000. She's had mental health treatment for 1,500. And then she also, because of all this, has not been able to work. So she has lost wages of about 2,500. And then she is looking to get scar removal surgery in the future for the scars on her hands and her arm. So there are still things that could potentially be needed within the future as well. So that's just looking beyond the medical expenses that were just for while she was in the hospital with the initial bite.
So first off, we did receive a letter from your client. From her letter, it appears that her physical therapy has been going well, that she has seen improvement. She is still shaky. However, from my understanding, she is an art teacher.
Correct.
So I imagine, with her hands being shaky, she is able to return to work. And from what it says, that she has returned to work. However, she is still shaky. This does show that through physical therapy, she has improved substantially. Now back to as for the mental health issue here, if this were to go to trial, I would request an IME on her because while I do understand that she does now have a phobia of dogs, she does have a dog herself. So in that matter, it appears to me that it's a phobia of strange dogs. Now, I do have to ask you how you got to that figure of $250,000.
So that's the policy amount. We can go down from that policy amount in taking everything. So what I just mentioned, hospital bills, physical therapy, mental treatment, lost wages, scar removal surgery, that comes to about 64,000. And those are just things that doesn't take into account any of the pain and suffering or future medical expenses.
So
So
subtracting, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
Subtracting lost wages, which is 2,500. And obviously we both know there's no question of liability here on part of the policy, our policy holder. We're all state. We have contracts with these medical providers, and we both know, especially you in your field, that these medical providers, they overcharge. And that's why we have these contracts with these medical providers. So we usually, on average, we pay 40 cents on the dollar for these medical expenses. So while her total medical expenses are 56,200, we would likely be paying on average, since 40%, 22,480 if we're paying 40% of these medical expenses and it disappears.
So she does have an updated amount to the damages that we were told. And so for hospital bills, we have 50,000. For physical therapy, we have 6,000. For mental health treatment, we have 1,500. And then for the scar removal surgery, we have 4,000. So those are the updated amounts to her damages.
These are the updated amounts?
Correct.
All right, one moment. So the 50,000 in medical expenses, what has that gone to?
That is for the hospitalization and medical expenses. So I believe the treatment that she received when she originally had gone to the hospital, and then she did have a 1-week stay due to an infection that was caused by the bite. And
the 60,000, that was for physical therapy?
The 6,000 was for physical therapy, correct?
Oh, 6,000, my apologies. So now it's going up from 5,000 to 6,000, you said?
Correct.
Okay, so since May 29th, hospital expenses have not gone up. It's been 50,000 back in May 29, 2020. So we can assume there's not going to be any more hospital expenses since it's been a year and they haven't gone up since.
Not that we're aware of. Those were just, again, for the initial bite. So when she had gone to the hospital originally for the bite, where they clean the wounds, stitch them up, and then she had to go back again because there was an infection. So there isn't any anticipated hospital bills or medical expenses, but again, there is that fear that there is going to be permanent damage where she still will be needing physical therapy.
Well, Ms. Riggs, from the records of everything I'm seeing here, her medical expenses and hospital bills were 50,000 about a year ago, May 29th, 2020, and today they're still 50,000. So we have not seen any future medical expenses. However, we've just seen an additional $1,000 in physical therapy in 1 year. That being said, by May 29th, we've also seen in that year from the bite, we have seen a lot of improvement. So we don't have reason to believe. And also, in addition, she's now back to work. So that being said, the 2,500 remains stagnant, and that's just an additional 1,000. So what I'm willing to do is, instead of the 65,000, what I'll do is I'll offer 75,000.
I mean, I feel like with the permanent damage, she still is going to have to receive her physical therapy. And because of that, her ability to work in that field is suffered greatly. And so she still might be losing wages, because if this is permanent, she will not be able to carry on working.
So Ms. Riggs, with the additional $1,000 in the past year, that would come to a total of, let me think, 56. That would come to a total of $53,200. And our initial offer was $6,500. Now that would go to pain and suffering and future potential injuries, medical procedures that would result. In the past year, we've only seen $1,000 added with physical therapy. Now, instead of me taking 40% of that $1,000, I'm willing to offer just the additional $1,000 onto my prior offer. As for any future potential treatment, Ms. Riggs, that's all speculative. We don't have a number for that. It could be. So I can't really make an offer on those grounds, but I can include it with pain and suffering. Because while we do want to help your client, we don't want to give away money that isn't necessary for them, that isn't needed for their health.
Well, so, I mean, the industry standard is giving 3 times the amount of the medical expenses that are being charged, and you're not even, giving 10% of that?
No, that was, this actually was 3%, but that is 40% of medical expenses covered. The issue we have is we feel that we are not rewarding full pain and suffering. The 3 times usually comes with pain and suffering. However, looking at everything here, we are willing to offer 2 times the total expenses for pain and suffering here. Now,
and why is that?
Because Ms. Riggs, she is improved in physical therapy in a year's time. There's been no further hospital bills or medical expenses in the past year. Now, while she has been seeing a psychiatrist due to her phobia of dogs, it shows that this phobia is of strange dogs rather than dogs in general, since this phobia clearly doesn't impact her relationship with her current dog, Smokey. May I ask what your counter demand here is? Because unfortunately we can't do $250,000.
200,000. I mean, when you take into account everything, hospital bills, physical therapy, mental health treatment, lost wages, scar removal, plus things that go beyond just those concrete numbers. I mean, Mr. Jenkins, she doesn't need anything from him essentially, and other people have gotten the full policy, and she does suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. She wakes up in the middle of the night with nightmares about the attack. She's lost several relationships as a result of all of this going on. There is the fear of the permanent damage, and while she might still have no phobia of her current dog because she's had that dog for numerous years, it still suffers her relationship with other people and other dogs because she no longer can even go to the dog park with her dog. So there's a lot of things outside of the concrete numbers that she's suffering with as well, and where that pain and suffering is something that she is dealing with.
Ms. Riggs, my problem with your counter demand of $200,000 is this. We do plan on rewarding pain and suffering here, but the issue is that times 3 is the reward of pain and suffering. Everything else is we cover in the medical bills. Now, if we cover the total medical bills at this point, which would be $57,200 plus the lost wages, and then we multiply that by 3,
so
that number is still less than the $200,000 offer. So that's insinuating that we are paying not 40%, but 100% of her medical expenses in addition to full pain and suffering. And your counter demand is still more than that number. So we have to go lower. My next offer, I'm going to offer $72,440. That is 60% of her medical expenses covered. Actually, no, $73,440. That is 60% of her medical expenses from the year prior covered, multiplied by 2. And we will pay the full $1,000 for her additional physical therapy in the past year.
So I'm sorry, but what are you calculating as the medical expenses and bills? Because this still isn't even taking into account the scar removal surgery or the lost wages that she's suffering.
Ms. Riggs, it is. The thing is, you have to understand, we're Allstate. We have contracts with these providers. we don't pay the full 100%. We get 40 cents on average on the dollar for these medical expenses. And then we pay them, they go away. That is why people have insurance with us. The thing is, you're requesting that we pay 100%. And that 100% is not all going to go to the hospital. So you have to work within our guidelines of how we work with these medical providers. Now, we're willing to pay 60%, which is above average, of your client's medical expenses in that first year, plus in full the $1,000 from their physical therapy, and in full the $2,500 from their lost wages multiplied by 2 for their pain and suffering.
Well, so that's what I'm asking. Can you go over what you're explaining as the medical bills?
Yes. So right now I'm going to take out the $1,000 from this prior year, right? Now, medical expenses includes medical hospital bills plus physical therapy. So medical expenses totaled before the $1,000 from this new year of physical therapy would have been $56,200. Now, 40%.
And what, so that's coming from hospital bills, scar removal.
Correct. That's
and
all of her hospital bills was about
which is
$50,000. Right. And then plus her physical therapy,
which is the 6,000.
Correct. So,
and then is that it, or?
So then 56,000. Then you multiply that by 40%.
So that's not taking into account her mental health treatment or the scar removal surgery.
Yes, it is, because that falls under medical expenses. That is, oh, sorry. I also included in there the mental health. That's also covered. So any healthcare provider, independent medical evaluation, that's covered. It is.
So 57,500.
Right now we're taking out the other year because we have offered to pay that $1,000 in full instead of the lowball percentage. But now my new offer here is offering to pay 60% of those expenses from that year. So the 60% of the 50,000, as well as, what is it? Sorry, 60% of the mental health treatment and 60% of the physical therapy. Now, that is above average, the percentage that we pay here. Now, I'm willing to hear a different counter demand, but I'd also like to know how you got to that number.
So we would be willing to drop it down to 190,000. And that is, again, taking into account hospital bills and medical expenses, physical therapy, mental health treatment, lost wages, scar removal surgery. So those are all of those concrete numbers that we have. But then also taking into account that she does have PTSD. She wakes up with nightmares from the attack. She's lost friendships from this. And there is still the possibility of permanent damage where she might not even be able to work for the rest of her life as the chosen field that she works in.
Ms. Riggs, like I said, we've received a letter from her. She is back to work. While her hands are still shaky, she is still back to work. Now, these personal relationships here, that's not something that we cover. Now, under pain and suffering, that's not something that has a price tag on it. That's not something that we can bill for or we can justify here. But
so that's what we're taking all of those concrete numbers and using the industry standard of the ×3 for the concrete numbers to coming to even 2,000 less than what that 3 times standard is for 190,000.
Ms. Riggs, that ×3 is for pain and suffering in like these maximum cases. What you're referring to here is questionable at the best.
And why is that?
Because we've had this letter from her that her health has gotten better over the past, from the time of injury to 2020. She's only gotten 1,000. Her hands were less shaky. Physical therapy had been working. She had returned to work. And now from that time, May 29, 2020 to now, there's only been an additional $1,000 in 1 year for physical therapy, which is less than she spent in the prior year, which was $6,000. These medical expenses are going down, Ms. Riggs, so there's no point in us offering 10 times what she had spent in this past year on physical therapy.
But if she has to be doing this for the next 10 years of her life.
So Ms. Riggs, my final offer that, sorry, not my final offer. The next, what I'll do is I'll bump it up to $89,300 is my next offer. What that is sorry, $90,300. That is 75% of her medical expenses from that year, multiplied by 2, because we truly don't think full pain and suffering is necessary here. So that's 90,000, because that's 75%. That is substantially more than we would typically pay the medical providers here. So despite even having that additional ×2 percentage that she's going to get for pain and suffering, she'll also have the additional money that she will get that isn't given to the healthcare provider.
I mean, it just still doesn't cover everything that she is going through.
Right, but Ms. Riggs, this is all speculative now. Now, we can't put a price tag on these lost relationships or lost friendships. What we can do is we put a price tag on what's in front of us, and what's in front of us is she's only had $1,000 of medical expenses in the last year compared to the $56,200 from that first year, which we do plan on covering. And we plan on covering that full $1,000 from this year in full as a gesture of good faith. But you have to work with us here. We can't just be giving away free money here. If you're going to come up with a number, you have to tell us how we got to that number specifically.
Well, that's what I did for the 190,000.
Right, but the argument is that it justifies that her pain and suffering and what she's gone through justifies that amount. But the question is, why does it justify that? Why is it that amount?
Because that's the industry standard of the ×3 for all of the concrete numbers that have been provided. And she's been told by doctors that this could be permanent. It's not, I mean, we can get potentially estimates to see how much it would be, but I mean, there's probably going to be permanent damage that also affects what she's doing for the rest of her life as a career path and as just a human being and her physical well-being.
All right. Well, here's my next offer. By the way, do you have a counter demand, Ms. Riggs?
Well, I'm sitting at the 190.
190. All right. Well, I unfortunately I can't do that today. My next offer is going to be 108,660. Now, I'm dropping it back to 60% if we are going to go full pain and suffering here. So that's 60% of medical expenses covered, which is still above average. So sorry, 109,660. Medical expenses, 60% of the medical expenses originally would have been 33,720. So for that amount, that year of medical expenses is gone.
So can you explain to me the 60? So you're only saying you'll pay for 60% of the medical expenses. So that means my client will have to pay for the other 40% of those medical expenses?
That's not how this works at all, Ms. Riggs. We have contracts with these medical providers. That's why people have insurance. We do cover it, but as well as I do, healthcare providers upcharge and overcharge, right? So for example, you go to a hospital, you get a procedure that's worth a couple $1,000, you get charged $10,000. And we know that working in this field. Now, we have in contracts, we're all state, we have contracts with these providers. We don't pay the full amount. In most insurance claims, it is rare, it's very rare that the insurance company pays the full percentage of the medical expenses. However, we pay a certain percentage off. On average, it's 40%. So 40 cents on the dollar. And those medical expenses are taken care of. Your client doesn't have to pay those medical expenses. Everything else from there should be pain and suffering, lost wages. And lost wages here has remained stagnant, and it is part of the equation. So my offer here is 33,700.
Why does that remain stagnant if this could potentially affect her ability to work in the future?
Because Ms. Riggs, she's returned to work, but
that doesn't mean she can stay at work in that job.
In the past year, she hasn't had any lost wages, and she's returned to work. We simply won't.
$2,500 worth of lost wages.
Right, and we are adding that to the expenses that we owe her. However, we're not going to add more. She's returned to work. She's improved in physical therapy. She's only had $1,000 in physical therapy in the past year. There's no reason for us to believe she'll have future lost wages, and we simply won't calculate for any more lost wages because there hasn't been any since before May of 2020. So it's incredibly speculative for us to believe that there will be more lost wages to calculate for. So our current offer is 60% of medical expenses from that year would be 33,720. You add the 2,500 from lost wages of that year, and then you multiply that by 3, because now I'm working with you here. We'll do full pain and suffering for that one. So full pain and suffering, multiply that by 3, that's 74,940. So inside that times 3, full pain and suffering should also include any future expenses, any speculative issues that may come up in the future. And that's the purpose of that times 3, is it encompasses pain and suffering and any future issues. Because the problem is we can't put a number on those future issues because it is speculative. We have no idea. So that brings us, and then we add the $1,000 from this past year. So we'll cover that $1,000 from this past year. And that brings us to $109,660. And I think that's a very, very, very fair offer.
I mean, I would be willing to drop from 190 to 170, but I mean,
you said 170,000?
Correct.
All right, now can you explain to me how we got from 190 to 170?
That's just dropping the pain and suffering as well. I mean, because we've already calculated that the total medical expenses is 64,000. Times that 3 is the 192.
Hold on, how did you get to that number? You said total medical expenses was how much? Because I have total medical expenses so far as 57,200, because from what I've been informed, 50,000 from the medical expenses, 5,000 from physical therapy, 1,200 from mental health treatments. Together, that's $56,200. Now adding the 1,000 from this past year, that is 57,200.
So I was also including the lost wages into that and the scar removal surgery.
We don't times 3 the lost wages.
Okay, that's fine.
The rule is we multiply by 3 medical expenses, and lost wages does not fall under medical expenses.
Okay.
So tell you what, this is, I think maybe the last offer I make here is 149,950. And let me explain how I got to this one. All right. And the thing is this, Mr. Riggs, if I leave a bit disgruntled and you leave a bit disgruntled, I consider that a good negotiation. I don't expect either your client to be happy, my boss to be happy, but you know what? If that's the case, at least we're both not happy, and I consider that a good negotiation. So this offer that I'm going to offer is 149,950. And now the reason for that offer is 75%. Now that's substantially more than the average we pay these medical providers. All right, so that's 75% of the medical from that prior year, which is 42,150. All right, now add to that the 2,500 and multiply by 3, you get 148,950. So she's getting 75% of medical expenses from that year covered, which is substantially more than usual. She's getting full pain and suffering with the times 3, and in addition, we're not subtracting the 1,000 by percentage, but instead including the full 1,000. So the medical provider gets whatever percentage of that 1,000 that they would get, and your client gets the rest. So your client leaves with times 3 in medical expenses of pain and suffering, plus extra money in their pocket from both whatever we don't have to pay the medical provider and whatever we don't have to pay the physical therapist. So that is your client will have an extra bit of money from this offer right here.
An extra bit of money that's still not taking into account the permanency of what this can be. If she has to go to physical therapy and mental health treatment for the rest of her life.
Ms. Riggs, in the past year, she's only spent $1,000 in physical therapy, and the rest is speculative. You
Yeah,
can't
you're
expect us
focusing
to
on this
pay.
year, and so that's $1,000. That could be $1,000 for the next 20 years of her life.
Ms. Riggs, but again, this is all speculative, and that is what the ×3 is for. That is maximum pain and suffering, right? That is the worst cases. And again, I went into this telling you that we don't necessarily believe this is the worst case of pain and suffering. We have dealt with many much worse cases of, kids being bitten by dogs, kids who are facially scarred for the rest of their lives.
And they're settling
mothers who've
for
lost nerve.
$400,000.
And yes, and those are the people that get that settlement. But the problem is, Riggs, is your client does not have the worst case scenario injuries here. And frankly, her medical expenses are substantially low for what they put it in. If this was a $250,000 claim, we are entitled to pay that $250,000. But Ms. Riggs, it's simply not. And the offer I just made, the $149,950, that is a substantially good offer, because that is a much higher percentage than we will be paying the medical provider, plus full pain and suffering, plus her entire $1,000 from this year is paid.
And we've previously settled nerve damage to the hand of a woman attacked by a dog at a park, which is essentially the same as this, and ours is even worse, which we settled for $235,000.
Ms. Riggs, look,
She has nerve
that
damage
was set, but
to
that,
her
in addition,
arm
that was settled
and
in court.
hand.
And the thing is, again, we don't want to go to court, but I'm not going to make a settlement on something. I can't make a settlement in good conscience that will give your money client that they don't need or they aren't necessarily entitled to. And as of right now, I am working with you. I am giving you a lot more than what I initially offered. I offered $65,000. And Ms. Riggs, I'm willing to hear a counter demand on your own, but I explained to you how we got to this number. I explained to you, the money that's going to be left over after these medical expenses are taken over that go to pain and suffering, which is more than ×3, because your client isn't, the medical provider is not going to, we're going over what the medical provider is going to take from us. The rest goes to your client. So this is over the ×3. Ms. Riggs, I am working with you here, but I need it on both ends.
Yeah, and that we've dropped it down from 250, which is the policy amount that if we went to trial could get, if not more. We've dropped that down to 170, which we believe is very low from what she has suffered.
Ms. Riggs, is that all you're authorized to give today?
Correct.
170,000 is what you're authorized to give?
Correct.
All right, can you is there any chance that I can get you down to 150,000?
No, not with what she's been through and the possible permanency of what her mental and physical state can be.
My question is, do you have the authority, or would you need to ask your client for the authority?
No, I do not have the authority to do that today.
Very well. Very well, we'll do $170,000.
Okay.
All right, I'll return to my client and I'll let them know. Again, Ms. Riggs, unfortunately, if I leave disgruntled and you leave disgruntled, and I knew that we weren't going to settle if I didn't leave disgruntled, that's how we get to the best offer. But, thank you very much for coming in today. And best wishes to your client as well.
Thank you, Mr. Murdoch.
How do I stop recording?